So here we are at the final few weeks of 2024, and what better to look at where we are currently in the Toronto real estate market. In order to do that, the most recent data we have put out by the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board is for the month of November. So we're going to take a deep dive into November's numbers, and we're going to really narrow down on average sale prices. We're going to take a look at inventory. We're going to see where that all fits in for different home types or categories with the 10-year average. So that'll give you a real good indication of where we fit in right now currently in the market. And looking back at 2024, it really was a very tumultuous year with a lot of starts and stops in the market, a lot of optimism and negativity on top of optimism on top of negativity. So we're going to really take a look at where we're at today, because it seems like we could be starting to see some patterns emerge, which could move over into 2025 and start to give us some indication of what to expect next year. So who better to have on this conversation than none other than my partner in crime, Kori Marin, broker and co-founder of Fox Marin. And for those who don't know me, my name is Ralph Fox, and I'm the broker of record at Fox Marin. I forgot there for a sec. And we would absolutely love to welcome you to our conversation here today at the Toronto Real Estate Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. And Kori, so awesome to have you here today.
Well, so awesome to be here. Ralph, I haven't seen you in so long.
I know, but here we are again together, reunited, and it feels so good.
I can't believe we're at the end of the year.
We made it.
Wow.
We made it. We beat the over-under. We made it.
The thing that's so crazy is that the year it went by so quickly, but at the same time, we packed in so much that I'm not sure about what events unfolded at the start of the year. And I'm like, did this happen in 2024? Did this happen in 2023? Like, I just feel like I've lost all sense of my timelines because the year's just been so rammed with just a bunch of crazy events.
And I think only to be compounded by the amount of uncertainty. And when you have uncertainty, you had a lot of nervous people trying to figure out what their best course of action is during a really challenging time where it's difficult to predict what's going to happen by the end of the day, let alone month, week, or year.
So. Totally. We have been real estate therapists more than anything this year. And therapists for each other and therapists for the team. Like, it's just been a whole year of real estate therapy. So with that being said, let's dive into some hard numbers to back up what we're talking about. And I think people who are listening or tuning in will see visually why the year was so up and down, because we've got some graphs to support what we're talking about. And then we'll add some color and context into certain aspects of the data as we slice and dice things. Ralph, as you mentioned, we're going to talk about 3 different home types: detached, semi-detached, and condos being the 3 categories we're going to look at today. For our viewers, I just want to be specific. We're talking about the 416. We're not talking about the 905 or the 705. We focus on central and downtown Toronto, so we'll bring our expertise to this specific data because we can speak to it, because it's the area that we trade in. And as Ralph mentioned, all of this data has been pulled directly from the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board, and these are the latest numbers that we can extract. You'll be seeing this podcast by the end of December, so this should be as fresh as we can get before the year wraps up. So let's dive in. Let's start detached. This is always a good place to start. This first graph that we're pulling up here, this table, is looking at the last decade. This is just helpful to give you a context as to where we stand and where we were 10 years ago. I can't believe how quickly 10 years has gone by, really, to be honest. And we're looking here at sales numbers, not price. And people get often confused, and even the media likes to shift this word around and use it in a different context. So when I'm saying sales, I'm talking about transactions moving through this system in this category. So firm deals. So in November last month, we saw 681 detached sales move through the 416. That is a significant amount of detached home sales, knowing and acknowledging this is our highest price category. And in fact, we're up 49% in terms of volume going through the system versus last year at this time. Now, by no means are we at our ultimate high versus former Novembers over the last 10 years. And as you can see here on this bar chart, there's been certain Novembers where we've been hovering close to 1,000 transactions per month. So there's a lot of reasons that this number has been dragged down. One of them, of course, is affordability and price. The second being interest rates. The third being just government instability, both here in Canada and in the US. The fourth being a lot of nervous buyers. A lot of people just not really sure what move they should next make. So there's a lot of influences here, and a lot of people aren't listing their properties for sale, and we can talk about that as well. So this is just a splash as to what is happening in this category. Ralph, I'm sure you have some thoughts.
I just think it's really interesting because people are trying to figure out, are we at the bottom? Have we seen the bottom of the market? And when you look at this chart, at least in detached, it's starting to show that perhaps maybe we are, as we're moving closer to that 10-year trend line, which probably my guess would be around 800, 750 kind of range. So we're actually not that far off. And certainly dramatic improvement from 2023 and even 2022, which is when interest rates started to rise. So now we're seeing rates come down, and we're definitely starting to see a shift in transactions year over year over year in this environment as rates are now giving a little bit more affordability to the hardest asset class to acquire in central and downtown Toronto.
And I want our viewers to know that when we look at detached, this is also looking at the very bottom of this category as well, like your little starter bungalow. And then this is also bringing in your detached luxury home from Rosedale and Forest Hill as an example. So all of these categories are combined when we look at detached. So you could look at anything from 680,000 for like a shacky bungalow that needs to be teared down to a $10 million plus Rosedale home. So this is a very diverse category to say the least. So this is a good place to start. And I quickly also on the second chart here did listing days on market because this is something, and we're going to do another podcast about this. This is a way to have a temperature check on how quick the market is moving. What is the velocity like? How quickly are things selling? And as you can see here, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that things are taking longer to sell overall. There's more inventory, there's more opportunity. Buyers feel like they have a little bit more leverage than ever before, which they certainly do. People want to take their time. They're being a bit more cautious. They're not just jumping into whatever they can get. They're choosing to purchase something they actually want, which is very much a change in buyer sentiment here that we haven't seen over the last 5-10 years. So on average, a detached property is taking 25 days to sell, which is 18% higher than last year. Last year, we were averaging 21 days. The year former, 19 days. But in 2021, we were averaging 13 days. I also want to acknowledge that these days on market are inclusive of the conditional period. So if a buyer has a condition of financing or a condition of inspection, as an example, this is included in the total days on market if the listing agent is reporting their listing days on market accurately, which not all of them do, but that's a whole other side conversation. So definitely seeing a little bit of a pullback in terms of the energy around how quickly this type of asset or home is selling in the city.
I think, Corey, that's a very valid point that you raised because the conditional period is pushing up potentially listing days on the market. And that's indicative more of the shift of the environment right now that we're in, where you could actually put those conditions in because we are seeing conditions on the sale of all property types in a way that historically we had just never seen before. Because there was just so much fierce competition. And so, if you remove the conditional periods and you started to compare apples to apples, it would be really interesting to see where things land
Yes.
Really, really interesting. The other thing is just I always want to bring to people's attention when they look at listing days on the market, and it's something to keep in mind as we go through all the different asset classes. 25 days by Toronto real estate standards is a very, very long time for properties to be on the market. But by any other real estate market in the world, it is literally like the blink of an eye.
Mhm.
There are really big markets in the US, and there are really big markets around the world where it could take a year. It's common to see 280 days for a property to sell. So 25 days relative to the rest of the world or relative to almost any other real estate market is blistering fast. And while we do see that uptick, I think a huge percentage of that, this is more an intuition just based on what we're seeing today versus in past years, boots on the ground, is those conditional periods are probably dragging it up more so than the actual time it's taking properties to sell.
Yes, completely concur. Great comments, Ralph.
Thank
So
you, Corey.
you're welcome. All right, so let's move on here. These are prices. So these are the average prices over the last 10 years. So I'm just going to take a step back just to make sure that our viewers understand what they're looking at. So we're looking at November 2015 all the way up to last month, November 2024. Again, these are detached homes, all stories. So the average sold price on average for a detached home in a 416 in November was 1.695 million, up 5.86% versus last year at this time and up from November 2022. And just to reflect back on what Ralph said, that's when we started seeing interest rates kick upwards. You can see that based on the historical November average, that we are at the height, whatever that means, in November of 2021 with the average detached home sale price at 1.811 million. And that was up 22% versus the former year of November 2020. And we all remember that if you were an agent or you were a buyer or a seller, this is just when everything went buck wild during COVID and money was practically being given away at this point in time. So it's nice to see a slow and steady climb up from November 2022 without there being any drastic changes in the numbers. It's good to see a slow and steady climb versus anything where you're seeing, jumps of 2 to 300,000 year over year because it's not sustainable. Also want to quickly acknowledge here, Ralph, before we hear your thoughts, that if you purchased a detached home 10 years ago, you're up 26% over the last decade. And if you had purchased a home before COVID, you're up almost 15% versus that 5-year time period that's passed since your acquisition. So things are looking like they're slowly trending up here. Again, we don't have a crystal ball. I'm also not saying just because the prices are going up that you have to buy a house. That's not at all what I'm saying. We're just reporting what the data is showing.
I think what's really interesting about this, two things catching my eye. Number one, this does happen to be the second best or most expensive November on history. So if you take that 2021 outlier out, it is a very interesting number to see. And then, second of all, again, just fascinating. If you look at pre COVID, like I really think every chart, every economic chart in the world should have a pre COVID line right down the middle.
Yes.
And maybe going forward, that's something that we should do because that's where my eye immediately goes to. And when I look at where we were in November 2019, when we were just a different culture, society, everything.
So innocent back then, weren't we?
I know, so young. A lot less gray. But you can see that we're at 1359. And if you said to somebody, and I say this a million times, if you said we're going to go through a global pandemic, a foreign buyers ban, 500 basis point increase in interest rates, and all the other government policies and failures thereof, and immigration ups and downs, where do you think the prices would be? You would probably say 50% off that mark. And here we are up almost $400,000 in price. Like nobody would have ever predicted that. And so it's an interesting perspective when you zoom out to look at these charts and think about it in context versus where the media is having you think things are just based on a random headline.
Totally. Well, you said zoom out. So now I'd like to zoom in and let's look at the numbers or prices year to date. So I thought this would be also helpful just to see how tumultuous the year actually was. So we pulled the average detached sold price from January 2024 up until last month. And you can see that we actually really did have a high or a bounce back similar to the outlier from the former graph at 1.829 million in that spring market, April, May of this year. And then we saw prices kind of come down again in July, and now we're starting to creep up again and then come slightly back down. So we're seeing a little bit of a wave or ups and downs throughout the entire year, which is indicative of your introduction, Ralph, where we're just like, it was a tumultuous year where everything was really unpredictable. And as much as we thought we knew which direction the market was going, we really didn't. And I think this is a good visual of what it was like to work in real estate this year because nobody knew which direction the market was going. And I think this could be an abstract painting that we could all post in our living rooms to be like, oh yeah, 2024. Yeah, that's what it looked like.
I'm looking at this chart and thinking, and people think Bitcoin is volatile.
Yes.
Look at that.
Now, I also would just like to showcase that even though you're seeing a high and then a bit of a low here, we're not at the low from the beginning of the year. And in fact, we're up 8.5% since January of 2024. So let's see where this trend line goes at the beginning of 2025. I also just want to remind everybody that we do live in Canada and we do live in Toronto, and January, February, and even March are just shitty months, all for many reasons, including the weather, but just real estate tends to be a little bit slower. People pull back a little bit. It's just not a great time to list your property. People don't want to get in their cars, drive and see properties. It's dark out, it's rainy, it's slushy, and we all have the good winter blues hanging over our heads as well. So it'll be interesting to continue to see where this trend line goes. And it's hard to truly predict. All right, moving on. Inventory also really one of the key indicators. And if you're trying to get familiar with understanding Toronto real estate and you really want to become more educated and you want to become more articulate in this space and you want to use data to make really smart decisions, I want you to get really acclimatized to asking your agent or understanding how much inventory is available. So Ralph, you're always good at telling our audience what this measurable is, and then we'll jump into what the numbers are.
Oh my God, I knew you were going to ask me this. This is the number one or one of the most important trend lines to look at when you're looking at a real estate market is how much months of inventory are on the market. It's something we talk about a lot here at Fox Marin. And the idea being is that if you took the current velocity of sales, meaning how long does it take a certain asset class to sell, and you had no more properties come on the market as of today, based on the current velocity, how long would it take everything to sell? So currently, for example, in the past month of November anyways, we ended up at 2.9 months of inventory, meaning that if no other detached came to market, how long would it take everything to sell? 2.9 months, which is still very much considered to be a seller's market. Anything below 4 months traditionally is considered to be a seller's market. So the detached side of things is selling still relatively quickly. And it is still considered to be in a seller's market. And it has come down the months of inventory year over year. From 3.2% the past November in 2023 to what we're sitting at right now, which is 2.9%. Still a little on the high side, but definitely starting to see that trend line come down a bit.
And what's interesting here for our viewers that can see the chart, if you look at November 2021, where you see that little tiny bar, we only had less than 1 month of supply. So 0.8 months of supply. Like that is an insanely low amount.
It's 3 weeks.
It's just crazy. This is when there's like, you have to book a showing. And I know that the team was talking about this with some of our more junior team members, that you would sometimes, to be able to get in to see one of these homes, you would have to book your showing at like 7 o'clock in the morning, because that was the only time that was available, because they were just back to back to back bookings with agents. And to get into these properties, you would start like fighting with people on the front lawn, because there'd be like a lineup of people and you wouldn't be able to get in during your blocked time slot with your lockbox and your confirmed showing. So you would just be running up to people with your phone and a screenshot being like, this is my time. And you would be starting to try to advocate for your clients to make sure that you could get them into the house so that they may or may not have a chance to actually purchase it. That's how insane that was.
And just to remind you, at the time, we were also wearing masks and gloves and hazmat suits.
Oh my
And
God.
sometimes even worse, somebody would be in the house and the lockbox would be empty. There'd be no key. And you would be pounding on the door. It's like, this is my time. Let us in. And they wouldn't answer the door. They'd act so surprised or blame it on the showing before them. It was chaos.
It was complete chaos. I just wish it was all documented so that we could do it. We could do a documentary about selling real estate during COVID, because it was hilarious.
We could do reenactments.
We could do reenactments. That would be even funnier. Okay, so this is good to see. I also did the same exercise here where we went macro and then we go a little bit more micro and zoom in and look at year to date in terms of inventory, because I was like, I want to know if we're like chomping through the inventory. And what you can see here is that we have more inventory available to acquire now in this category than we did at the beginning of the year. Now, remember, what did I just tell you? January, February, March tend to be just like a slower time of year for inventory to be coming out, because it's just a shitty time of year for Toronto to showcase this particular type of property. So that is highly influential in terms of the inventory being lower at the beginning for seasonality purposes. But what I find interesting is that we've grown in the inventory over the year. But what I also find interesting, and you can see this pretty effortlessly looking at the chart, is that we've started to chomp through it. And are we seeing the beginning of a new trend line here where inventory dropped 2.6 months in October, remained there in November, and is that going to start dipping as we head into, one, a climate that's not conducive, and two, a better interest rate environment? Ralph, did you want to add anything?
I thought you did a great job.
Oh, I was used to saying no, but, and then go on.
I know. It's an inside joke.
So here we have covered off detached houses. If you have questions about detached specifically, drop them in the comment section below anytime. We're happy to address them. And then I want to just follow the same exercise on semi-detached. We might not dive as deep now that you sort of understand the graphs. And then we'll do the same with condos, because condos, it's its own separate market, really. And I really want our viewers to understand them as being two different segments of what's going on here in Toronto as we head into 2025. Cool?
Cool.
All right. So semi-detached, for those of you who are brand spanking new and are like, I don't really understand the difference between a detached and a semi-detached. I totally get it. I was there one time too. I didn't understand. Detached, exactly how it sounds. You're just there on your land, on your own. You're your own entity, your own bricks and mortar on your own lot in the city. No one shares walls with you. If you live in a semi-detached house, you are sharing one of your walls with your neighbor. And on the other side of that wall, they live and breathe and cook and smoke and talk and yell and walk up and down their stairs, and you might be able to hear them. And on your side of the wall, they might be able to hear you drinking, eating, walking up your stairs, and all the things that you do on your side of the wall. So the type of wall in between your two houses matter, but that's a whole other conversation. So that's your semi-detached, okay? This is probably the most popular category for our buyers out there that are moving from their first condo into their first freehold house. So this is like the entry level house, which is hilarious knowing that the average price is very high. Or you might see buyers skip their first condo and have the bank of mom and dad help them acquire their first property, and it might be in this category. This is probably the most competitive category, and often it's competitive due to the lending practices and rules around this, which has just changed actually, and we're going to get into that. And also just due to the price category generally ranging between $1 million and 1.5. And a lot of these properties are also in very trendy, youthful neighborhoods where there's a lot of young families as well. So this is going to be a hot category, I predict, for 2025. So I'd love for you to get as educated about it as possible now so that you're ready to hit the ground running if you're looking to move into this category next year. Semi-detached houses sales moving through the system. We saw 207 sales in the month of November. That's up 23% versus last year. We're seeing a little bit more velocity in this category. And Ralph, to reference what you say, we're hovering closer to that 10-year average for sales in this category for the month of November, which generally hovers around 250. Of course, we're not seeing those all-time high numbers that we saw when interest rates were dirt cheap in the 2020s and the 2021s. But we're going to start seeing, I guarantee, transactions moving quicker, faster, and at more pace moving into 2025 here for sure. And we're already seeing an uptick in this category over the last week. And what's the week? I think when we're filming this, it's December 16th to 20th, somewhere in there.
That range.
Somewhere there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just before Christmas, a few days before Christmas.
Yeah, I don't even know what day it is anymore. I don't even know what year it is half the time. Okay, so anything you want to add about sales transactions, Ralph? Okay, so let's look at quickly listing days on market. So you're going to see here that just like we did for detached, things are taking a little longer to sell. This has a lot to do with the fact that buyers are putting conditions in their offers, as they should, because they can. And if I was a buyer in this category and I was looking in these market conditions, I too would put conditions in my offer. And if I was a buyer agent working with a buyer, I would try to put conditions in too. Pad the offer, protect yourself. You've got time right now. Time is on your side. It will not always be like this. So enjoy it while you have it. Do that extra due diligence, cross your T's, dot your I's. So 21 days on average, listing days on average, up 9% versus last year, which was at 19 days. So it's taking an extra couple of days on average. And of course, we're not seeing the speed that we saw in the marketplace in November of 2021. So something to keep your eye on as this number condenses, or when it condenses, that means everything is moving faster and you, buyer, have to be a faster decision maker. All right, prices.
Very interesting.
Very interesting, right?
Yeah.
So we're starting to creep up. We're creeping up, except for that outlier again in November 2021, where we saw the prices averaging at 1.431. This year, we're capping off the year in November at 1.248 million, up 2.7% versus last year, where we struck 1.215 million, and the year before, 1.189 million. The other thing that's interesting is if you bought a semi-detached house 10 years ago, you're up 65% in terms of price appreciation. And then you're up 7.5% versus 5 years ago if you've made it over the COVID hump. So is this the beginning of a new trend line? And out of all the ones I feel like I could predict, I'm going to say this is the beginning of the new trend line for this category.
Again, going back, it is, aside from 2021, the highest price we've seen for a semi-detached in November in Toronto, second highest, which again is really, really interesting. And what you got to keep your eye out for, something we've talked about in past conversations here, is that there's a new government regulation that's come in, or policy, that if you're putting less than 20% down, you are no longer capped at $1 million. You are now capped at $1.5 million, and your amortization has been increased from 25 to 35 years. So now anybody looking at that $1 million, $1.2 million, $1.3 million, $1.4 million price range that has good income, but no down payment, it's really, really, really significant. And one of the things that I said to our team members is we're like, well, how many people are in that position? And I said, it really isn't going to take that much. Like if you look at the amount of sales that we had 200 sales in the month of November. If this adds 100 new buyers to downtown Toronto at this price point, it's going to put a huge demand shock onto this asset class. And so that's really something to keep your eye out on. Again, look pre-COVID, 1,067,000 all the way up to 1,248,000. And one of the things when it comes to Toronto real estate that you have to understand is, let's just say you put down 20%. So you put 200,000 down on a property let's say was 1,067,000, and let's say it's now up 1,248,000, you're up 248,000 tax free because it's your principal residence on your initial $200,000 investment, not including mortgage paydown versus paying rent. So there is a real good story here that's emerging, especially in the low rise asset class as it moves up in price points. It's people who bought pre COVID or even after COVID are going to end up having been happy that they did.
100%. And just for a point of clarity, you said the amortization period increased to 35 years. Is it 30 or
30. Oh, I'm sorry. I was rambling. Good catch. Good catch.
Just wanted to make sure because like somebody in the comments section would correct.
Oh my God. I never would have heard the end of it. So thank you for that. Good catch. Kori, safe.
Always be listening.
Oh gosh, yes.
Always be listening. Okay, well, this is also very interesting to look at. So now we're zooming back in. And here's an example, another year of insanity. So you can see that we actually hit a high in spring market of this year in this asset class or home types, because I know somebody in the comment section is gonna be like, why are you calling it an asset class? That's
Sarah's so paranoid about the comments section. Like,
I do get
sorry.
paranoid. I get so like, I don't like feeling like attacked on there in terms of like being like, we're trying to shove this in people's faces and forcing them to buy real estate. So I'm
Very vulnerable, like to put together all this data and then to go through it and then to say one little thing wrong or make a slight error on a graph. It's a lot of pressure for the viewers at home.
No, when I make the graphs, I make the graphs. So I'm always like, my solar plexus is just always on high alert. So I'm
Sweaty
like,
palms.
wow, it's true. And armpits, actually.
Yeah.
I wear these blazers on me.
I know.
I always.
That's why they keep the camera above the neck as much as possible.
Okay, so you can see the high in the spring market. So we did hit an average of 1.4 in the spring market. And honestly, I don't even really remember the spring market anymore. Did we have one? I guess so. It's not like I remember it being so crazy.
Yeah.
Anyways, we are up 4.14% versus the start of the year. Again, you guys have heard my lecture. We know that the start of the year is not always the highest point of the year. So that definitely does influence. But just look at how all over the place we've been. Like whenever we've reported on stats over the last decade together, Ralph, we've always been like looking at trend lines that just generally kind of look like up and up and up. There might be a few little dips, but not like these where they're just like all over the place. So this is how the year has been. If you felt like things had been a little bit shady or confusing, there you go. A little validation for you.
Exactly.
All right. And then this is inventory. Okay. Inventory, definitely something we want you to keep an eye on. This is interesting to me that we're in this category. We still feel so competitive. We're actually up versus last year, just slightly. So last year we had 1.9 months of supply in November, and this year we're at 2.1. Yes, we're still in a seller's market. I do expect this inventory to start chomping through as we just mentioned with the new lending rules changing in this category being very competitive. But it is interesting just to see it stacking up year over year. I just think there's been just pullback overall in terms of people waiting on the sidelines, trying to make a decision about what to do next. And of course, it has been exceptionally overwhelming. And if I were a buyer, I would be taking my sweet ass time as well. We totally get it. And that's probably the right decision to make this year moving into 2025 will be good, smart time to start having conversations about your next move. Get as educated as possible about what the market is doing. I think there's going to be a nice reset period. A shift in government is coming sooner rather than later. And I think we're going to be hitting a little bit more predictable period of time after a rocky couple of freaking years. And then inventory from year to date. So this is your trend line. We started with less inventory. We're up 21%. So we have more inventory now than we did at the beginning of the year. And we have seen that inventory line accelerate over the last 11 months.
Interesting chart, though. Much more linear.
It is a lot more linear. It's a chart we understand.
Easier on the eyes.
It is easier on the eyes.
Oh,
all right.
Gosh, are we talking condos now?
I know. Gosh. So before we move into condos, if you have questions about semi-detached, pop them in the comments below. And if you have questions about a different category and you're like, well, I own a condo townhouse or I own a row house or whatever, just drop your questions below. We can pull the data pretty easily for you. We're happy to do that. If we did all the different categories, these podcasts would be 3 hours and you guys would be so bored. All right. Condos. Ralph, I think that you should just kick off with a general synopsis about condos as a market within itself.
Yeah, condos have really, really, really struggled. And it has been the bad child of the Toronto real estate market. We are starting to see a bit of a turnaround, and we'll go into that as we look at these slides and talk about the market. But there has been a lot of pressure on the condo market with a lot of investors. 60%, 70% of the condo market is basically comprised of investor owners. And so they are far more sensitive to rates. And as rates continue to tick up, we saw a lot of investors put their properties on the market. But what was interesting was as much of properties as we saw on the market go for sale, we didn't see the drop that a lot of people were expecting. And I think a lot of landlords put their properties up and were like, well, if I can get my price, fine, but I don't have to sell and I might not go out for dinner tonight or go on that vacation, but I'm going to hang on to my real estate. And if I'm under real duress, I'll call up my bank and they'll work out something because they don't want to be sellers of last resort. And so we saw a lot of inventory come to market and we saw a lot sit on the market. And even at the worst, while we were seeing some sales, those sales were of the properties that were generally geared towards end users, meaning people who were going to move or live into those properties. And those were the most livable properties, the most desirable locations, marketed well. Those were the properties that were churning even at the worst part of the condo market. But we're starting to see that uptick as we're seeing in low rise. And I think that's going to start putting some pressure on buyers through affordability into the condo market. And we're starting to see a slight change in the market right now. And we're going to talk about that as we get into the slides. But definitely the last year, tons of inventory sitting on the market. We did see some challenge and softness in pricing, but not the drop that was being purported in the news or the type of drop that people were expecting. Because generally only the good properties were selling, and the ones that weren't selling, the prices weren't really dropping. Landlords were just renting out their properties and just trying to wait out for the best offer to come in. And now we're at a point as well where those landlords under duress, under variables, are starting to see those costs come down to rent. Although simultaneously at the same time, we are starting to see cost softness in the rental market as prices are coming down. So again, so many changing paradigms to be thinking about when looking at the condo market. But it definitely is the most susceptible to duress given the high interest rate environment that we have been in and hopefully are starting to come out of.
I have one comment about that. You said that landlords would be like, maybe I just won't go out for dinner tonight and hold on to my real estate instead. And you know what? If you decide not to go out for dinner in Toronto right now, you could be saving yourself to
A payment.
$600 to $900 depending on where you go. And there has been a couple of dinners that we've had over the holidays where my jaw has literally like fallen on the ground when the bill has come. And this is not from us drinking Veuve or having insane bottles of wine or anything like, crazy like caviar or some insane like seafood, I don't know, tray or whatever. I'm just like, wow, going out for dinner in Toronto is insanely expensive right now.
Exactly. I mean, two people can still do have a reasonable dinner in the city, but you're still looking at a couple $100 if you include a slight trace amount of alcohol. It's true.
So I digress there, but I just want to say, yeah, like if you want to hold on to your real estate, just don't go out for dinner. You'll save yourself like a practical mortgage payment. Anyway,
Or maybe go to the keg versus Blue Blood. Just a tip there. Pro tip.
That's just a side little anecdote. Okay, let's just quickly look at transactions here for condos. So I just find this amazing. We saw 1,100 plus transactions in November 2024 in this market segment. Up, people, 37% versus last year at this time. And up from November 2022 as well. Now, are we at peak level of November 2021? No. But like, we're starting to see ourselves creep up to that 10-year average line. Like, when you see the media report on this, or you stumble across, and this happens to even me, and I know better, like some really terrifying TikTok video where people are like, oh my God, this person bought this condo for $900,000. They just had to sell it for $530,000. They had a net loss of, $400,000+ on it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I get sucked into it too. This is not amazing news, but it's not bad news. I just am like, okay, like it's just boring.
It's not DEFCON for Armageddon. And if you start to look at some of the factors leading into 2025, it does start to look a little better. And you do start to see this trend line potentially, maybe even marginally continuing on into the new year.
Exactly. Here's listing days on market. Of course, it's taking listings longer to sell. We're at 36 days. I get it. There's more supply out there. There's poor buyer sentiment out there. There's a lot of negative news about this category. The supply is up. There's selection out there for you to look at. So of course we're up, all right? Up 28% versus last year and about 11 days longer to sell versus 2 years ago and 16 days longer to sell versus 4 years ago. And of course, buyers and their agents are packing in conditions here as well. And we're not seeing multiple offers in the bidding wars that we were seeing on condos of former years. So it makes sense to me. This is not surprising in any way. This is a slower category. We're being completely transparent with that. Prices. Let's just look at this for a second. Like, where's the cliff?
It's not there.
I know.
Again, we're almost at, where we are above the 10-year average for sure, well above. And again, like if you look at where is it here, 2019, we're at 660, and the condo market is actually up on average, despite everything that's been thrown at it and everything that you've read in the news. I would never have predicted that. Like ever. In 2019, if you told me all the things that were going to happen, I'd be like, it's going to be 50% lower.
I thought it was going to turn into like the complete like ghetto. Like where people would just abandon their condos. That's what, if you told me all this was going to happen, I would have expected it to be like a Ben Affleck action movie, where like
make movies.
What?
Does he still make movies?
Yeah.
Oh, he does.
I don't know. I was thinking like Armageddon or something. Wasn't he in Armageddon?
Yeah, maybe a young Ben Affleck.
Yeah, like a young Ben Affleck or like a young Will Smith. And like half the buildings are abandoned and there's like a really cute dog running around and like, I don't know, something like that.
Zombie, maybe the fentanyl apocalypse.
Like that.
Yeah.
So every time I pull this chart, I do kind of expect to see the cliff. And I'm always like, oh, and I'm like, oh, thank God I don't see the cliff. So if you had bought a condo 10 years ago, you're up 71%. That's insane. And if you bought one 5 years ago, you're up 11.4%. And you're not even that far down from the high. Now, this year, there's been some ups and downs, and we're going to show you as we zoom in on the next graph. It was like all over the place once again, another piece of abstract art for you to absorb. I also don't feel like there's going to be a major change to this graph next year. Like, I think that when we pull this next year at this time, it's going to look pretty similar. These bars are just going to wave up and down slightly. I don't think we're going to see a big jack on price in condos. We've got a lot of inventory to eat through first, and a lot of people need to wrap their heads around this segment. And a lot of things need to happen in Canada and Toronto overall for people to park their money here. That's kind of what I feel.
I think you're going to see a push-pull in the condo market. I think the push going on the pricing are going to be those desirable, bigger type condos where people forced out of the $1.2 million price range are going to see great opportunity in the condo market at around $900,000. I think where you're going to see the pull on the market, and this is completely intangible, but I think there's a tremendous amount of condo owners who are one bedroom, one plus dens, who traditionally would, maybe with the help of mom and dad, move from their condo into a freehold. And they have been trapped in their condos because they don't have the equity to move out. And I could say probably just with our client base, there's at least a dozen who are really looking to sell their one bedroom or one plus den so they can either transition into a bigger size property or leave the country entirely, and they can't. They're stuck. And so I think once we start to see that uptick in the market, there's a lot more inventory still to come out. So have we seen the Armageddon? No. Is it going to happen? Is there this massive price crash? No. But I think there's a lot more inventory pressure that's even on the market waiting to come on the market. And so I just think that, we're going to hover in that $700,000 price range, give or take, over the next year. So I do think we agree.
Yeah, we totally do. I think it's going to be very unsexy.
Yeah. And for all those people in the comments section who keep just lambasting that the condo market is going to crash and that it hasn't happened yet, it is not going to happen. I'm telling you this now. Sorry.
Okay. This is condos just year to date. I think this is helpful to see as well. Again, very much all over the place, highs and lows, highs and lows, highs and lows, as the whole year has been week over week. Still up since the beginning of the year, though. Just under 1 point, but still. Guys,
Amazing.
we kept the 7 in front the whole year on it.
Never gave the 7 up.
Oh, no, we did. We did.
Oh, yeah.
August.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
We gave it up in August. Screw you, August. Okay, so keep an eye on this. I want to look at inventory. Inventory has been the juggernaut of condos. 100% has been the juggernaut. And look, you can see from last year, we're down. We're down 13, almost 14 points from last year at this time. So we're definitely in a balanced market. We're at 4.8 months of supply. Yes, that's a lot. We're totally acknowledging that's a lot. But just remember, at least 50% of this is shit. Shit inventory. Bad bills.
Maybe we could use a better word, but yes.
Not quality. You're allowed to swear on YouTube, by the way.
I know. I just think there's better ways.
Not quality inventory or tenanted inventory or not cared for inventory or inventory within super high maintenance fees. Is that helpful?
There's our dog in the background. I don't know if you can see him.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, he's not inspired too much by the condo market, obviously.
He would never want to live in a condo.
No, he needs to leave the room, actually.
So, perfect. Okay, so this is condos. This is where we're at. So obviously we're on the higher side. This does not take a rocket scientist to break down what this table looks like, or bar chart, I should say. And then look at the year. This is the easiest chart we've had to look at. It's just a slow, steady increase in inventory. So we're up 53% in inventory in this category versus the start of the year. And again, climate does influence, not as much in condos, I find, as it does in freeholds. Like a lot of freehold owners want to list when they can show off their front lawns and their backyards and their beautiful porches and stuff. So I don't think it's necessarily as influential on condos, but that is definitely a visual tool that I want you viewers to think about when you are educating yourself about this category. And we're not anti-condo. I want to be very clear about that too. We love this category. We own condos. That's how I personally started my own real estate portfolio, was in the condo market. I'm so grateful for those first condos. And yes, I'm completely acknowledging that this is a while ago when condos weren't as expensive back then. So I also need to just say that to protect myself from the attackings. But I really was able to leverage the first condo to diversify from that first condo purchase, which almost killed me to get. So I think that's where we need to wrap up our conversation. Is there anything else we want to talk about condo-wise here, Ralph, for anybody, or anything about what we discussed?
I think we did, or you did a really good job putting these charts together, Corey. So thank you for that. I think the visual really helps give an understanding of what's happening in the market and how we've really seen some ups and downs. But if you zoom out and you see the trend line basically on all segments of the market, it really isn't so bad considering what it could have been. And it starts to sort of give an indication of where we could end up or where we're going, at least over the next few months, with a whole bunch of wild cards being thrown at it in January. So we'll see. But thank you so much, Corey, for putting this together. And if you made it to the end of this discussion, we are so glad that you did. Hopefully, we added some value and some food for thought. And we would just like to thank everyone. I think, as far as I know, this might be potentially our last aired podcast in 2024. But we do have some great predictions in future podcasts coming up for 2025. So please be sure to tune into that. Thank you so much for joining us, Corey. So great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Ralph. I'm so glad we had this discussion today. And if anyone feels that they want to offer up a movie which could have been indicative of what you might have anticipated Toronto to look like had we given you all these possible sequence of events that unfolded before they actually did. I would love to hear which movie you would use as your analogy. Mine, of course, being Armageddon with young Ben Affleck is what I would have said.
I'd say The Shawshank Redemption. I just love the movie, and maybe there's some type of a redemption story in the Toronto real estate market this year. That just came to mind. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend the best movie of all
I've never
time,
seen Shawshank
Shawshank
Redemption.
Redemption. You
Who's
what?
never, who's never seen that movie?
There are people out there, I'm sure. We should ask Ian Busher on our team. Somehow has never seen any movie ever, so we'll ask him.
You probably have never even seen Forrest Gump.
Well, there you go. Corey, thank you so much. One of the things I always forget to say, so I'm going to remember right now, please be sure to hit that like or subscribe button so you can stay in touch with us in 2025. And if you have any comments, as long as they're constructive, we'd absolutely love to hear from you down below. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays.